Ladies and gentlemen, from VMware, please welcome Matthew Lodge.
Thank you, very kind. Good morning, and welcome to everything you ever wanted to know about VCloud Hybrid Service but were afraid to ask. So when we put this section, and this session together, I should say, we wanted to make it, try something a little different and make it really open to the audience. So we asked on social media, various different Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and all of those different platforms, we said, what do you really want to know about VCloud Hybrid Service? So a lot of what you see in this presentation today is as a result of those questions. So quite happy to go into the level of detail that you guys were looking for. So you'll see we're going to talk a little bit more detail about how we built the service and how it's architected. And I'm also going to bring up Christopher Rentz, who's the Senior Vice President and the CIO of Digital River. So Christopher is customer of the service, and so he's going to talk about what Digital River is doing. And we got some great questions from social media for Christopher about how he made his decision and got started with the service, so we'll cover that. We're going to have just a little quick readout on where to learn more. So what are the other sessions you can go to where you can dig into this? We have a kind of a boot camp going on, or a jumpstart for VCloud Hybrid Service. We can take you all the way from the 101 all the way through to advanced networking and advanced topics. So you'll see how you can do that. And then we're going to do Q&A. So any questions that you have right here, Christopher and I can answer for you. So let's get started. So what problem are we trying to solve with VCloud Hybrid Service? And essentially what we saw is this gap opening up between line of business or business units, depending on your organization. Different sizes of organizations have different challenges here, and the IT team. And part of the reason for this was that the IT team was really focused on maintaining reliable, secure infrastructure. We often saw organizations that were really focused on cost reduction. There's nothing wrong with being focused on cost reduction, but it's a very different goal to the business. And the business was on top-line revenue growth, agility. How do I get into new markets? How do I launch new products and services? How do I expand geographically? Right? It's all about speed and how do I get there quickly. And so you saw this tension evolving between the IT team, who's managed and measured in a very different way, to line of business. And we said, well, what if you could have a cloud service that helps the IT organization deliver highly reliable service, supports the existing applications, helps keep the lights on, secure, reliable, but at the same time allows line of business the level of agility that they expect out of an IT organization going forward. So a common platform to span both of those. So that's really the problem that we set out to solve. So in terms of the hybrid service itself, if you think about the block diagram, what's in it, you think of it as the software-defined data center for rent. So VMware is supplying, as other cloud infrastructure providers do, everything from the ground up, so the infrastructure, facilities, hardware, compute storage, networking, the operating system catalogs, applications, and then you have both the API and the web console on top of that. So API is how you integrate it with things like vCloud Automation Center, other management tools, and the web console is the direct access for you for the management of the service and also for developers and others, people who are consuming cloud services from you. And the gap here in the slide, what we want you to be able to do is bring your own licenses, bring your own virtual machines, and bring your own tools. So it was very important to us that you had a service where you could bring what you currently have. And that's incredibly important because most organizations need to be able to start with where they are today and grow and take that service forward. So you're going to have new cloud-native applications, but you've also got to be able to bring along your current set of applications. Nobody that we talked to said, you know what, I have a completely clean slate, I can start from scratch, and I'm just going to rebuild all my applications for the cloud. The only people that get to do that are startups. Most organizations said, well, you know what, I've got SAP, I've got this customer database, I have my ERP system, I've got to integrate these new applications that I'm building with all of those. I need to be able to bring everything along. So we tried to make that as simple as possible. Now, on the license front, bringing your own license, as many of you know, is easier said than done in some cases. And it really depends on the organization, the ISV, the license terms for the ISV. So for example, with Microsoft, you can't use typically your Microsoft operating system licenses in a cloud service, certainly not a multi-tenant one. So we're also licensing software from third parties like Microsoft, like SAP, so that you can buy subscriptions, licenses, buy the drink on VCloud Hybrid Service. So operating systems, all of the common components, applications, things like that. Bring your own virtual machines. You can literally take a virtual machine that you have running in vSphere today, upload it to the VCloud Hybrid Service, and run it without change. So all of the operating systems and applications that you rely on today. So we support over 90 operating systems, 3,800 applications today supported by the vendors on vSphere. All of those run on VCloud Hybrid Service. And then bring your own tooling. Right? It's very important that you're able to use the same management approach. Right? So when you think about VCloud Hybrid Service, the commonality at APIs, the commonality of the cloud catalog. Right? So we can do catalog synchronization. You can synchronize the catalog inside of vSphere with the catalog in VCloud Hybrid Service using vCloud Connector. So we have a customer today, for example, who does that for all of their development and test work. So when they've got a new image that's sent out to testing studios, this is a computer games company, they use catalog synchronization, it automatically syncs it up to the cloud service so the testing studios have exactly the right images for them to work on. So the file format is exactly the same. It's OVF, right? The open virtual file format for virtual machines. The hypervisor, of course, is the same as vSphere. Firewalls and IP addresses. So you saw in the keynote, Pat talk about NSX and virtual networking, and the idea that NSX does the same thing for the network that the hypervisor ESX did for compute. So we're a very aggressive adopter of that technology in the VCloud Hybrid Service. And what that means for you is that you can replicate the network architecture and the topology that you have in the network inside VCloud Hybrid Service. You can create as many virtual networks as you like, connect them together. You've got edge gateways that implement firewalls and load balancers, DHCP, NAT, all of those network functions. And so you can build virtual network topologies that match the topology you have in the physical network. And that means you can bring along the same set of firewall rules. You can use the same set of IP addresses. It's a completely isolated networking architecture. We also let you span your layer 2 networks. We support layer 3 VPNs, but also layer 2. So you can bridge networks. You can bridge network from your data center into the service using SSL VPN. So we wanted to make it so you could connect to your data center, and really VCloud Hybrid Service could function as an extension of your data center in all these different ways. So I had a lot of questions about the architecture for the service and kind of what's behind it. And if you go to some of the more in-depth sessions, you can learn more about these various different areas. We have sections on storage, we have sections on networking. There's a set of hands-on labs associated with this. You can go and check the service out and test it for yourself. But I just wanted to give you a quick drill down. We just take a peek under the covers of the architecture. So what you see from left to right is if we think about the systems that VCloud Hybrid Service is based on. So x86 architecture, we support VM sizes up to 112 gigabytes. It's much larger than many clouds. And our purpose there was support high memory workloads. We had a lot of customers in testing who had very, very large VM sizes, lots of memory intensive workloads. Each of those servers has a dual redundant 10 gig connectivity. And we run virtual networking across that for the three main network types, the storage network, the Ethernet and IP network, and the vMotion network. So those are virtual networks. So we aggregate the 10 gig connections using link aggregation. So it looks like 20 gigs of bandwidth out of every single server, considerably greater than most cloud services, and we do that for performance reasons and consistency of performance. And then we're using things like network I/O control. So we're segregating that network and bandwidth limiting these various virtual networks so we can give good, consistent performance for the workloads that run on the service. So the storage network, the storage traffic runs over a converged network. It's all one network. Our network architecture is very straightforward at a switching level. We have a very flat, very fast core network, and on top of that, everything is run using software-defined networking, using vCloud networking and security. So very, very flat, and then we just use VXLAN for tenant isolation. That's how all the virtual networking is done, and all the switching, the routing, all of the layer 4 through layer 7 services are all implemented in software. So the software-defined data center in action. So the Ethernet network, full SDN, if you want to create new virtual networks, you can do that. You can plug them into the edge gateway. That's where the load balancers, firewalls, all of those layer 4 through 7 services sit. The vMotion network, so a separate virtual network for vMotion between servers. So by default, when you get a virtual machine and run that on the service, you get a fully redundant virtual machine. So using all of the vSphere HA that you're familiar with, right? So a lot of cloud services today don't offer redundancy. When you run VM, it may or may not work, and if it fails, you need to start another one. And that's essentially the design philosophy of the Amazon cloud. When you start a VM, it may or may not start, and it may or may not be up in 3 hours' time. They don't guarantee that. If it goes down, start another one. Most applications that you guys run don't have that kind of assumption about the underlying cloud infrastructure. They assume much greater reliability. And so using vMotion, we can make sure that if we have to take a host down for service capabilities, maybe power supply has a problem, something like that, we can vMotion everything off, all your VMs stay running. In the case of catastrophic failure, a host goes down, we're going to restart all the VMs automatically in the same way that you would expect with vMotion, DRS, and HA. The storage architecture is SSD accelerated enterprise class storage. We've also limited the tenancy, and the purpose there in limiting the tenancy is to make sure that the SSD acceleration is very effective and very efficient. All right, so we're essentially caching the most recently used data in the SSDs, and so limiting the tenancy makes sure that that caching is very efficient and very effective. Right, so the default storage profile, the default storage you get on VCloud Hybrid Service is that SSD accelerated. So if we take a peek under the covers, the next question I had is like, well, how much does it cost? So this pricing is on the website, but I'll also take you through it right here. So what I'm showing is compute, and we've got two flavors of service for VCloud Hybrid Service. The first one is dedicated. So dedicated is fully isolated compute. Right? So you get dedicated servers just for you. And that is between 10.3 cents and 13.3 cents an hour. So you can do the hourly comparison. Why is there a difference in those two prices? And that's to do with volume discount. The more service you buy, the cheaper it gets. So you see the range of prices based on volume. And then you can also see our support costs. So you get full support from VMware. You can call GSS. You have a problem, call GSS. They will fix it. You have any questions, call GSS. They will answer your questions. Need help getting your workloads on board, GSS will help you with that. And then on the other side, we've got the virtual private cloud service class. So this is a multi-tenant service class. So you're sharing the compute resources with other tenants on the service. And that goes between 4 cents and 4.5 cents an hour. So obviously much cheaper. And the reason that it's much cheaper is because you're sharing with other tenants. And then you can see the support costs associated with that. Now, disk I was talking about, the SSD accelerated disk, between 13 and 17 cents per gigabyte per month. And then bandwidth over the baseline, we give you a free baseline 2.9 to 3.2 cents. So you get a feel for the service and how much it costs. So you can do your comparisons with other services. We offer this as a subscription service. So you're buying capacity, which you can then divide up into virtual data centers. And there are different terms available for dedicated cloud and virtual private cloud, and you can see all of that on the website. And then down at the bottom, for free, we don't charge you for firewalls, disk I/O, load balancers, VPNs, DHCP, A lot of things that you get nickel and dimed for on other clouds are part of the service for VCHS. So you don't pay for those. All right, so first 3 locations, Las Vegas, Santa Clara, and Sterling. So you just saw Bill Fathers talk about this in the keynote session. So the first 3 locations, Las Vegas was the first data center that we built out. That's where the early access program took place. We're adding 2 more here in the Bay Area and Northern Virginia. And then we've also got the 2 sites that were announced in conjunction with Savis. So we're going to be up in New Jersey and in Chicago. So there'll be 5 sites in the US over the next few quarters. The Santa Clara, Las Vegas, and Sterling sites will all be available in September, just in a few days' time. The other question I got was about international expansion. So we're in the process of building out our international data centers. We'll be in EMEA early next year, in Western Europe, and we'll say more about that in the cities and locations in a few weeks' time. And we're also going to be going into Asia Pacific, APJ region, and again, we'll say more about that closer to the time. So planning very aggressive expansion. And if you are interested in what locations or you have particular needs, then we're certainly interested to hear from you, because a lot of what we do here with the service is guided by what we've heard from customers and from clients and their requirements. So we're very interested in hearing about that feedback. So then I got a couple of late-breaking questions when I was putting this together just over, actually yesterday. So, 3 new questions. So why isn't VCloud Hybrid Service using a pay-per-use model? Great question. So we will do a pay-per-use model. That is currently, engineering is currently working on that. We'll do that implementation. And so it'll be traditional pay-as-you-go. Sign up with a credit card. Just pay for what you use. So we chose to do the capacity-based model first. It was also a way that enabled us to integrate with our resellers and our partners. And our partners are able to sell the service. They're able to bill you directly, and they're able to offer value-added services and help you with professional services. And so we built out a capacity-based service initially. The other advantage of the capacity-based service is it's very predictable in terms of costs. And so we heard from a lot of organizations the way they like to budget, they need to have predictability, and they need to be able to fit in with the purchasing model that their organization always has, that has today. So being able to buy a subscription gives them that predictability in costs. Now, of course, there are some people who don't like subscriptions at all and just want to do pay-as-you-go. We'll cover you guys in the future. It's one of the things on the roadmap. We will get there. It was just a question for us of priorities and which one we did first. Second question was, do I need to have a private cloud in order to use VCloud Hybrid Service? And the answer is no. You can just start with vSphere. If you've got vSphere, you're fine. Any virtual machine that you can run on vSphere, you can run in VCloud Hybrid Service. You don't have to have vCloud Director or vCloud Automation Center or anything like that. And then the third question was, will you have data centers in Canada? So it's funny, this question comes up a lot from our Canadian friends. So we're taking a look at that. We don't have any current plans, but that's certainly something that we're looking into, and we're looking into other sites. So the same applies. If there are specific locations that you're very interested in us covering, we'd love to hear from you, because we'd like to understand what the demand is and where you want to see service. But right now, no plans for Canada. Okay. So now we're going to introduce Christopher Rentz. So Christopher is the Senior Vice President and CIO of Digital River. We got some really great questions for him. He's going to talk about vCloud Hybrid Service. But first of all, I have an introductory video so you can learn a bit more.
Hello, my name is Christopher Rentz, and I'm the Chief Information Officer of Digital River. At Digital River, we build and host global online businesses for thousands of companies, including some of the world's most respected brands. Our business is about helping our customers sell goods and digital content across multiple online channels. At its core, Digital River relies on technology to manage more than $22 billion in online transactions across our international data centers. We have partnered with VMware to deploy their technology stack, along with SQL, Oracle, and other supporting services. This technology combination has helped us improve our time to market, respond to high volume transaction processing needs, and to support our customers globally.
Christopher, please come and join me. A round of applause for Christopher, please. Thank you. So we got a whole bunch of questions for you here. Before we dive into this, we saw in the introduction there a little bit about Digital River's business. Mm-hmm. Now, I saw yesterday that your team actually won an award at the TAM Day for best use of software-defined data center. So why don't you talk a little bit about your environment and what your team does?
Sure. So, well, good morning, everybody. Afternoon, evening, depending on where we are. So Digital River basically started a few years ago to really partner with VMware, partner with their other providers to build our data centers to be software-defined data centers. So as we went through all the virtualization, put it all together, we have 3 core data centers that are globally load balanced. So they are running all of our commerce engines. So what we did is we put together as to how are we using, if you looked at just vSphere, and then be able to go to the automation suite, then using dynamic operations. We started building all of these components so that we could really end a kind of a synthetic transactions across our environments. So right now we're basically a part of the consolidation efforts go along with that. So we were able to take out about 50% of our footprint, reduce about 30% of our utility costs by going down this path. And what this allowed us to do is that then we own our infrastructure. It looks like a VMware environment, if you think about it. So when I look at the hybrid cloud, we look like that. We're a container. We designed it going forward. But to the earlier point that you had is we have a lot of applications. So now it's taking those applications and having to figure out how are they going to run in that environment. So how are you going to tune them, work with your development organizations, and really partner with the business to try to figure that out. So that's basically what our roadmap's been. We have another 2 to 3 years in our roadmap, which then exposes it into the third-party clouds, because our core business is not to be in the data center business, but to really be able to manage that in a third-party cloud. So using the hybrid cloud services will allow us to expand globally, faster, cheaper, but a lot more dynamically.
So how big is your environment right now?
We have about 6,000 virtualized machines worldwide,
okay.
And that's running our production environment. There's probably about another 2,500 in the development sphere.
Right, and so for those of you not familiar with Digital River, if you bought something from an online store, chances are you've probably used Digital River's service in the back end.
Correct. So if you go to Lenovo or Microsoft, it's literally end-to-end life support. So basically it goes from the time you go to the website, the store, all the way through the commerce component of it, all the way through the payment component of it. And that's one of the big differentiators, is that we need to segregate our data. We need to segregate all the processing. We have a financial processing arm. We have basically our data processing arm. And since we're doing this globally, this is where a lot of the segmentation comes in that really helps you, is understanding where is that data going to be. How is it going to be managed? Do I know where it is? So when I go move it into the hybrid cloud and I'm looking at it, helping the segmentation that they had listed out here is definitely going to make a difference, because then I can then go quarantine this specific data that really doesn't get exposed. Then I can use the shared environments to be able to go for my development, or maybe for my proof of concepts environments. So it really provides a whole life cycle of what you can use.
Okay. So we've got a whole bunch of questions here, and so the theme, I think, lots of folks wanted to know how really to get started. That's where a lot of this came from. So what I'm interested in here is, you've obviously taken this step, but I think a lot of folks are also interested in, how do they get this approved, and you're the CIO, what are you looking for? So I think you give some of that when you give some of your answers. But let's just get started here. So what did you start with? What use cases and workloads for VCloud Hybrid Service?
I think the big component of that was to when we looked at it, was try to figure out what did we need outside of our 4 walls. So as we look to expand, it was really stepping back and saying, we've already built our internal clouds. We've already built it to a standard that would be able to easily go forward. And then when we went to go look at the hybrid cloud services, was looking at smaller applications to be able to do your test bed, and then literally be able to move production. So it was really a business case that sat and looked at what is the transactions that are there today, what is the volumes that we're pushing through those transactions, what is the support level. That was another big component of this, is it a really hands-on environment that you really, no matter where you put it, you're going to have to do a lot of care and feeding for it. So really walk through each part of the life cycles, selected a specific set for the proof of concepts, and then moved it forward. And the way it's designed is we'll literally be able to pick up this container and plop it over there and run it. That's the model that we've designed.
Okay, so you picked essentially a set of pilot.
Pilot.
And what was your criteria? How did you select those?
Basically was to test throughput. Since we're a high transaction, everything's real-time transactions,
Right.
was really looking at something that can handle throughput.
So high throughput applications were ones you were looking
Correct.
for? Is that right?
High throughput. And ones that really do a lot of, if you think of from the disk space, they're doing a lot of IOPS. They're doing a lot of calls and a lot of database hits. So we literally have thundering herds that can hit us. So how can you manage that thundering herd so it doesn't burn out your database? So how, using our proprietary tools along with VMware, could we manage that?
Okay. All right. So second question, related, but I think trying to get more at your decision-making process. Why did you decide VCloud Hybrid Service? What was it about Service that was good for you?
I think the big part was just the maturity that we have in-house and looking at our enterprise-wide licenses. So as we look to be able to move across the world, be able to say, what are the tools we have in our toolkit? So we already have an enterprise-wide license. We have teams that already know how to do this, and we wanted to be able to, the way we've designed this is what I call a container and cartridge. So the applications are the cartridge, the technology is the container, being able to then move that into the hybrid cloud, have it running, and then be able to work with the development teams, with our third parties on their applications that would be able to pull over that. So the business case that goes along with that is just the total cost for just the technology. Think of it that way. So you're now going to be kind of your subscription based. And then from there, what is it going to take to move your application? So the part that's really, that you talked about earlier, was it's not completely transparent, but you can literally pick this up, move it over there, start running with it, and then start working through all of the processes that you need to literally extend your production and development environment.
Okay, so say a little bit more about that. You said it's not completely transparent. I think the audience is going to be shocked to discover it's not as easy as just picking it up and moving it over. So what kind of things did you find out?
Well, I'm old school, so I wish there was an A/B switch. But really, it was what you have customized inside. So you think you have an application, you have an infrastructure that you've now gone from physical to virtual. So now you've stood it up, you've got it running. Now you're going to go put it somewhere else that's outside of your control. So every night you're going through your batch jobs and making sure that's running. Every night that application has a log file process that potentially has a runaway component of it. It's really going through. You've designed custom APIs that Bob built for you, and Bob's not around anymore. I mean, you walk through all those pieces that you have to go through. So it's just an educational plan, and it really helps you, though, to map this. This is one of the best benefits. You're literally mapping what you're moving, so you have a really good baseline.
So mapping in terms of dependencies,
process, documentation, all those things that come with history that this allows you to do.
Okay, all right. So what did you do to prepare? So the third question. Did you do anything to your existing infrastructure to get ready for this?
Yes, basically, so we started our virtualized network, but a big part of it was partnering with VMware, Cisco, HP, literally sitting down for the architecture. So we knew we already had our virtualized clouds. We knew that we wanted to move forward with them. But to make sure this is successful, we really sat down with the vendors, brought in their engineers, said, this is the throughput that we're looking at hitting. I mean, we can have 100,000 page hits within 10 minutes. I mean, depending on where it is from the world. So we're really trying to figure out what it is, how can we scale, how can we... So it's really important to sit down with each of those vendors, sit down as a partnership, because your end goal is seamless support, seamless capability. So that was the biggest benefit.
Okay. Did you change your infrastructure in any way? I mean, it sounds like a great exercise to figure out throughput and things.
Yeah. So basically, we went from a different baseline. A lot of it was Sun OS capability.
Okay.
Moved it all over.
So
really,
x86.
x86 is the standard that we've moved towards. Really going through that and doing a lot of the performance testing. That was a big chunk of the abilities for the proof of concepts. Is can you really run through it? Can you burn it down? And really take the opportunity to make sure that it can handle what you need it to. And that worked out really, really well.
Okay. So that leads us on to the next question. So what did you do in your proof of concept?
The big part of the proof of concept that's been set up is really if you think we call it global commerce. So really taking a component of that stack and then having it sit there so that it would be able to process. So really it's an extension, it's a small module of that extension, but be able to start to prove that you have the network, you can start to talk, you can start to use your tools. Because remember, we have, all of you too, we have independent monitoring solutions that are inside of our house. We now have to talk to something else. So that was the same part is how do you start to work through those processes.
Okay, so you took an existing application, something that was well known to you in terms of performance.
Sure, something we could benchmark.
Yeah, so that's pretty common from what I've heard from other customers. It's it's a known quantity, essentially, so then get started with. Okay. Next question. So how does VCloud Hybrid Service address management issues like cloud sprawl that are common when adopting hybrid cloud?
I think the big thing I always think of VMs is kind of like M&Ms. So the minute you start, you don't stop. Especially when you turn them over to a bunch of people. Okay. So really one of the big parts is that there's a lot of, I'll just call it the accounting and management that goes along with this capability. So now you go in, you're going to enable this type of environment for someone. They're going to get it set up. You already have your chef scripts or your scripts that are building that for you. Then you can manage it. So you're really getting your daily, weekly, monthly reports. You're getting your dashboards. You can sit down with a development organization or an R&D organization and say, all right, guys, you have this. You left the faucet on. So this is what it cost us. So now when we go into these type environments, this is how this is all going to work. So this is one of the big things is the benefits is I'll say the maturity that's laid over there for the oversight management.
Okay. So you mentioned Chef in there, so you guys are using Chef today?
Correct. So basically we spin up all of our virtualized instances, and there are probably about 65 components of one instance that we have. And so that's what we're using to really just punch them out.
To do that automation, punch them out. Okay, great. All right, so what's the learning curve of moving a workload from an existing environment to VCloud Hybrid Service?
Big thing is communication, is stepping back away from the technology, is really sitting down and whiteboarding out what it is. What are you trying to move? What is your goal? Is your goal that I'm basically just replacing infrastructure, that I want to have the capability to burst for a holiday? And that's where we look at is I need massive capacity on demand. How can I have that ready and available? So it was really sitting down and understanding what the business drivers are, what is the technical drivers, and how do we enable the teams that need to do that. So I think a big part of it is just communication, and you've got to stick with it because it becomes another tool that's in your kit. And so you really have to make sure that it's adopted and supported and it's managed and you have oversight on it. So that's one of the biggest benefits because it's there in the sense that now that you're moving through there, think of it this way, is some of the tools and capability and maturity on VCloud Hybrid Services, you can start to push back onto your environment.
Okay. All right, and let's go for the final question here. Best practices, things you would recommend other companies do if they want to adopt the service?
I think the big one is really having a core group. So start with your core as to you've got your IT group, you have your developers, you have your business people. Get a core group of what it is you're trying to accomplish and really lay that out because you're going to have a business case that you have to put forth. So someone's going to have to bring it to the CIO and say, we want to go spend this kind of money. And oh, by the way, there's all these other really cool stuff that goes along with that. So we want those too. And then basically that's going to have to go to the CFO. So it really has to show what is your return on investment. So you're either going to be reducing your CapEx, and if you're reducing your CapEx, then you're going to reduce your maintenance and your OpEx. And then to your earlier point about the licenses that you have available. So we have an enterprise-wide license, which gives us a lot of flexibility. The other part of this then is then being able to leverage licenses I may not have today. So I'm just going to go subscribe for those. So then I'm not having to make those investments. So that's probably the biggest one. Okay. And I think just communication, guys, is the big part.
Okay. So make sure I understand that right, and we're clear on this. So best practice for you was, you talked about making the case. I mean, obviously you're the CIO. A lot of folks in this room, going to be taking their case to the CIO. So it sounded like what you were doing here, this was capital expenditure reduction, is that correct?
Yeah, capital expenditure reduction, right. Facilities, network, one of the classes we went through our consolidation effort was really looking at how these services could help reduce that investment.
Yes, so Digital River's bought, I think you told me 23 companies over the last couple of years. Yep. So consolidation is a big deal for your business.
Correct, yes.
Yeah. So I think that's the other thing that we see a lot when organizations trying to connect cloud usage back to the business. How does this drive either reduce costs? How does it drive new revenue, drive agility, move faster into other marketplaces?
Yeah, because you really drive it down to EPS. It's your earnings per share. So if you can take out IT costs or overall costs, it's really going back into the margin of the company. Okay,
excellent. All right, so I'm going to ask you to stay here because we're going to go for a Q&A here in just a few minutes. Before we do that, what I want to do is just give a quick plug to the other sessions for VCloud Hybrid Service. So we've got our Jumpstart program here. So there are 5 sessions starting out with architecture, moving into networking, advanced networking, moving and deploying workloads, and then the deep dive into hybrid cloud management. So you can see these various different sessions here in the various different rooms. And as part of that, we're going to be giving you a prize for attending all of these different sessions. So we're going to be handing out at the end of the session this card It's your sort of trip report card, if you think about it that way. So we want to know how you find the sessions and how you rate them from 1 to 4 stars. And if you collect a sticker from each of those sections, put it on there, bring it to the booth. Bring it to the VCloud Tweet Up on Wednesday from 6 to 9 at Row, 651 Howard Street, and collect your prize. Extra credit, there are 2 additional sessions, I should say, 6 and 7. So we're really interested in your feedback and would love to know how you found the program. Other things related to this, the hands-on labs, the VCloud Hybrid Service Jumpstart for vSphere admins. So if you want to start with vSphere, you want to learn more about the service, the hands-on lab 1301. And then there's a group discussion with Ninad Desai, who's from the product management team on VCloud Hybrid Service. You want to get into more deep questions. That's session 1004 in the group discussions. And now we're going to open it up for questions. So if you can bring the lights up and make it a little easier. We've got microphones here and here. And any question you would like to ask about VCloud Hybrid Service, feel free to ask. You can just go to the microphone and get started. Please, sir. Can we turn the microphone on? I think it's on.
Test. There you go.
There we go.
I currently have a private farm, probably 85% virtualized. So I can't see currently I'm spending capital, business is invested heavily in making sure I have a dynamic, flexible internal infrastructure.
Okay.
When I look at moving into the hybrid so that I can dynamically burst or even move services out there, it changes my cost model because I'm not a P&L from a capital to OpEx view. And so as I move dynamically infrastructure between the two, my cost model changes considerably. So how does an IT department handle that with the business when the business wants either an OpEx or a CapEx type of cost model? So
2 points to that. I think it might be useful for you as a CIO to talk about that. But one of the things you can do is buy VCloud Hybrid Service as a subscription, and then it basically becomes a recurring cost. So you get a little more predictability into your cost that way. But I think, Christopher, you want to talk about justification and how you do that?
Yeah, so basically when we looked at it is here's, we're going to go spend X millions of dollars. Along with that, we've got the maintenance and you got the depreciation. So really being able to say if you're going to go and expand into a subscription model, we're going to look at it that way. The offset is the maintenance and the depreciation. So really if I looked at it 3 years out or even next year or next project, I need to go spend $10 million to build up something or $50,000. Then I've got this option. So it really works pretty well for the CFO to be able to look through and say, here's my CapEx depreciated over 3 years. That technology is going to age faster than that 3-year depreciation. So here's my options to be able to do that. And it's basically transitioning the depreciation and the maintenance into your OpEx.
Okay. So.
Hi, how you doing? For the dedicated cloud option, if you have a Microsoft Enterprise agreement in keeping with the BYO licenses, aside from maybe Windows Server licenses, how easy is it to migrate, say, your SQL, your Exchange, your SharePoint licenses, anything under that License Mobility Act that can kind of seamlessly go through the...
it depends on your agreement with Microsoft, and I am not the Microsoft expert, but I can hook you up with one of those. My understanding is that you are able to bring some of those licenses if you have the right enterprise agreement with Microsoft. And if you don't, then you have to license them by the drink, and essentially you can, when you run them out of the catalog on VCHS, you'll get charged an hourly fee based on the Microsoft licensing cost. The licensing guide for Microsoft is over 100 pages.
I know.
And so hopefully you'll forgive me for not knowing all of the details.
That's quite all right. That's why I was afraid to ask this question. That's Microsoft for you. But
I mean, that is the challenge with a lot of cloud licensing, is a lot of licensing models don't translate. But Microsoft is actually getting better. We can certainly take a look and see if we can figure it out.
But it sounds like it's nice, because if I have a situation where, okay, maybe I have licenses that are outside of my enterprise agreement or non-Microsoft licenses that are part of your service provider license agreement, to leverage that, that's almost like a hybrid approach right there. It sounds like it could be
yes, and unfortunately, I wish there was something I could do about that. I can wave the magic wand and make all licenses transferable, including our own. But,
Thank you.
all right, thank you. Yes?
So we run all of our databases on clustered SQL, mostly with a shared disk, the old way that the SQL is clustered. And it's been a bit of a challenge for us to run virtual to begin with, but if we go with the hybrid cloud model, do you offer clustered VMs?
So all of the VMs in vCloud Hybrid Service are clustered in the sense that you're running HA and DRS, if that's what you mean.
I mean, can you have a shared disk between the two? Can you form a
Yes.
Windows cluster?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer.
Should be able to.
But why don't you stop by the booth and we'll get somebody who knows a better answer than I do for that one.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Wow, stumped. Awesome.
Hello.
Yeah.
I deal with a lot of clients that actually have legal ramifications of keeping their data within a certain geography up in
Yes.
Canada. Are you able, with your vCloud solution, to isolate these databases, this bit of data, is only going to live in this geography?
Yes. So in all cases, we don't move your data around. If your data is in the Las Vegas data center, it doesn't go anywhere. It's stored and replicated in that location, obviously for redundancy. But we don't move it around, and we can absolutely guarantee that's where it stays.
So it doesn't go from data center to data center?
It doesn't go from data center to data center. That's
Okay.
correct. Yes.
Yeah, you mentioned about how you had to work with Cisco and some of the other vendors to set it up initially. So can you maybe shed a little bit more color on what's involved? How big was the effort? Did you set up a vMotion network that goes between on-prem and the public cloud? And what was the cost involved to set that up?
Did you get that?
Yeah, so I think the question is basically what was the effort to bring in the partnerships? Really, when we sat down, we decided that it would be EMC, it would be VMware, it would be Cisco, it would be HP. I mean, based on all the research we had done as to how we wanted to move that forward. So then it was sitting down with each of those vendors collectively and saying, this is what we need to accomplish. And so I'm going to say, 6-month effort over time. We were already building these things because we had already had the decision to go forward. But it was really making sure that they were there with us to say that if we're putting in this type of core, we're putting in this type of firewall environment, it's going to be able to handle this. If we're going to go virtualize this. So it's really architectural planning, working with the teams very closely with the vendors.
Wow.
Well, on that note. But yeah, so I'd say it's about 6 months on the planning effort. So.
Okay. Question on this side? Oh, maybe that was that microphone exploding, maybe. Please.
Sure. So I understand one of the parts is there's integration with SRM, it's directly from failover from your private cloud into the hybrid. So one of those key components is obviously storage replication. So when you start talking about that, even with inside of vendors like EMC,
VMAX does it one way, VNX does it another way.
Yeah.
How are you guys leveraging, and how do you do that replication for the back-end storage so we can do something like that?
Right, great. Okay, so just in case folks didn't hear the first part of the question, said, okay, so you're doing this DR as a service, that obviously involves storage replication. How are you doing that is essentially your question.
Right. I mean, we leverage current technologies like SRDF and VNX and NetApp and all that other stuff. How do you, how do you do that into the cloud?
So we're doing host-based replication, and we're using the replication that's built into vSphere. And so essentially what you will have at your, you'll install a virtual appliance into your vSphere installation, and it will do replication of the VMDK files across to the vCloud Hybrid Service. And then on the vCloud Hybrid Service, when you have a DR event, you will automate the bring up in the same way that SRM does the orchestration and bring up of the VMDKs today. So that's how we're doing it. Okay. Yes.
And Matthew, one of the questions you addressed was on the on pay-per-use or a pay-per-use model.
Yes.
You said that was coming.
Mm-hmm.
But the slide that you had talking about pricing sort of showed pay-per-use or utility rates. Are those the effective utility rates of the subscriptions?
That's correct. They are the effective utility rates of the subscriptions. We did it that way because what we saw was when we put pricing in front of folks, they were doing that calculation on the back of an envelope into cents per hour. So we did it that way. Yes. I think this gentleman was next.
Yes. Could you maybe speak to the analysis of workloads? You mentioned that moving workloads to the hybrid environment isn't completely transparent, and that there are probably, in the area of integration, some design patterns that move very well, and there are some things that don't move very well. Mm-hmm. And perhaps if you could just give a few specific examples of what you found.
All right. I think one of the big things was the custom tools. So if we look at the custom infrastructure that we've built, that there were tools around an application that if you're going to go move that over, get that into VM performance. So I think a lot of it had to do with the way our chef was built, also the way that our custom tools are set up. So it's what we're doing for monitoring, what we're doing for batch scheduling, what are we doing those pieces. Those are, you can set up the technology, you can spin up the infrastructure that's there, you can even put the application there, but it's a lot of the callbacks. It's really, if this is home base, and now it's going to be telling something over here what to do, it's really making sure all that's happening real time, quickly, and you're getting the response and the log messages back. So, depending on what's going on, we're getting, just like everybody else, tens of thousands of alerts, right, continually going on. How are you capturing that, and now you're getting it from a different site? So that's the big part of making sure that everything you're sitting from that API coming back into your site, you're understanding it, you're collecting it right. How are you firing your alerts on? How are you suppressing your alerts depending on what's coming back here if you need it or not? So I think that's one of the biggest pieces of working through that. It's just the logistics of how do these two environments talk back and forth to each other.
So just to follow on to that, so what are things, maybe invert the question, what are things that don't transfer well that you would think were candidates for just staying where they are inside your existing physical data center?
I think it goes back to the earlier question, is that if there's a specific application that may be into specific processing, there may be some regulatory requirement for HIPAA or regulatory requirement. You've got it caged off. You've got a bastion host. You've got this thing set up to be completely separate, and you need to keep it that way because it's easier to, you're getting X number of audits every year, and it's easier to take them in there, show them it's segregated. Here's how it is, and here's all the process. When it goes into a cloud, it can be completely secure, completely capable, but the auditors, if you look, a lot of the questions they're asking, they still don't understand how that's working. So they really don't understand that. What do you mean you virtualized it a bunch of stuff, and where is that stuff? So those are a lot of the questions that we get. So it's just some of the stuff, just keep it in a container and keep it there until you can get that maturity through there.
Okay. So this sounds really good for the enterprise customer who is running primarily vSphere. But what about the VMware VCloud service providers who are already offering VCloud powered services in their own data centers? It sounds like there's a little bit of competition with the VSPPs. Can you speak to how we'll work together on moving forward?
Yeah. So the question was about competition with the vCloud service providers. So for some services, this is competitive, and it depends on what the service is to what degree or not. But also for a lot of service providers, this is also complementary. And so the deal with Savvis is a good example. So they have their own vCloud service. They're also doing VCloud Hybrid Service. And they feel that there are different use cases for those two different offerings, or different sweet spots for those two different offerings. And so some vCloud Hybrid Service is additive to their portfolio, right? They've got lots of hosting, co-location, cloud, various different offerings for different purposes. And so they see this as something else that they can add onto that, and they become more relevant to their customers by having a greater set of offerings. So it varies, depends who they are. I think the other important point to make is everything you can do with vCloud Hybrid Service around moving VMs around using vCloud Connector, you can use vCloud Connector with all the vCloud powered services and the vCloud data center services. It's the same tool, uses exactly the same API. So that's the other thing. You can build a blended service where you're using vCloud powered service from a partner as well as vCloud Hybrid Service. Yes?
Going back to the previous question, at the end you were talking about kind of segregating off parts that you don't want for various compliances. When you did move into the cloud, did you have any issues with either PCI, SOX, HIPAA, or did you keep all that internal?
No, that it gets expanded. So for PCI, so we take credit cards. So now you have to have your PCI, you expanded your sphere of audit into whatever cloud. So basically, you're now sitting down with any other providers and saying, what's your SS8016? What is your PCI? If they aren't PCI, then your PCI auditor has to go in and take care of that. And so it starts adding a layer of complexity. So it's achievable. It just kind of goes back to the auditor having an idea of what's really there, because he can't touch it. So it's really getting all the process, the procedures, where's the data, the logs. They do a lot more review of who has access. So what are the access controls? Because now as they do that review, then they have to serve that up. So, but it adds a layer of complexity because it's just outside of your control.
And the thing that we do on the VMware side is to get the various infrastructure certifications associated with things like PCI, associated with HIPAA. Most of those standards have moved to the point where they have like a baseline for the infrastructure, a set of security controls essentially that you have to have in place, and then you have to have the documentation and the proof that those controls are there and functioning. And so that's VMware's responsibility, is to deliver on those. So we have SSAE 16, HIPAA is a couple of weeks away, PCI a couple of months, and for us it's a matter of just going down and knocking down all of those certifications. Yes?
You said you were interested in any type or anybody who's any international countries who could benefit from the hybrid cloud type of scenario. There's two I can think of off the top of my head.
Okay.
One is Sao Paulo, Brazil, which has a population count of 11 million people.
Yes.
As opposed to, say, the largest city in the United States, which is New York, which is 8.3. So there's a huge density for people actually who could benefit from that. The second country is in Germany.
Yep.
Because they have the strongest.
PII.
Yeah, exactly
yes.
right.
Data protection and data privacy. Yes.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
So.
Yes. Yeah, very familiar with the Germans. So whenever you go to Germany, that very, very keen. The data must stay in Germany, and that's they have some of the strictest data privacy laws in Europe. So yes, thank you. Any more questions? Last call. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.